and they have like sun, moon, and stars. They have like all-seeing eyes. They have Masonic handshakes. These are all engraven into the granite of the temple. And nowhere is there a cross. There is not one Christian symbol anywhere on the temple. And when we went into the temple, there was all sorts of weird Masonic stuff that I recognized because of my background. But most Mormons wouldn't, they just think, oh, well, this is a little strange. Because let me say this, if you go to a typical Mormon Sunday meeting in what they call a ward, that's like their local congregation is called a ward, it's kind of like being at a Protestant church, except it's more boring. I mean, Mormon meetings are kind of about as interesting as watching paint dry, but people put up with it. But if you go to the temple, it is so radically different because you get these weird robes to wear. You put on this weird green Masonic apron. You wear these funny hats if you're a guy, and if you're a woman, you wear this really ugly kind of bridal veil thing. And again, all of this used to be secret. But now, because of the efforts of people like me and Ed Decker and Chuck Sackett and other people that are former Mormons, you can probably go on YouTube and see, what all this stuff looks like. So anyway, we went to the temple, and this is where the plot really thickens, because we had been told to give certain key words when we were brought into the Salt Lake Temple, that would open doors for us. And as it happened, they had a computer system installed just a few weeks earlier. We said these words into the computer as part of our registration, and the whole system went down. Their whole system crashed for whatever reason. And so they took us aside, and we went through the dog and pony show you go through. It takes hours. And then he arranged for us to go and meet the president of the temple, who's kind of a big deal. And he, in turn, arranged for us to meet with one of the 12 apostles, who's, at that time, it was Elder James Faust. Believe it or not, his name was Faust, which, has an association with black magic. But anyhow, so we sat there and we told this man, because again, this guy was like in the top 15 people in the whole world for Mormonism. And we said that we had dreams and visions where we were in the Salt Lake Temple celestial room, even though we didn't know what it looked like. And we saw all these people in white robes around this altar. And on the altar, which is like kind of like the altar you'd see in a Masonic temple, they said it's white satin upholstered, very beautiful stuff, was laying a nude girl. Obviously not a mature woman, but somewhere probably a pubescent teenager. And they were all, chanting and stuff, and it was implied they were going to have sex with her. And they were crying out to Lucifer and calling him Marvelous Lucifer. Well, we shared this with this high-level Mormon guy, and he looked at us, and he looked kind of like taken aback, and we thought, oh boy, we're really in trouble now. We're going to get, thrown into the bottomless pit or something. But he said, and you gotta, if you know Mormons, they have this thing that they do. It's called bearing you their testimony. And if you want to say something as a Mormon, really serious, really important, you say, well, I bear you my testimony, but. Well, anyway, this guy said, well, I bear you my testimony that the things you have shared with me are true. And that Lucifer is the God that we worship in the temple. And if you can move out here, because at this time we were still in Milwaukee, and become residents of the Salt Lake Valley, we can probably find a place for you in temple service. Well, fortunately, we didn't make that move. And in the meantime, I was reading the Bible, because the Mormons use the King James Bible. At least they were at that time. I don't know what they're doing now. But anyway, and I was reading the New Testament, and I just kept finding things that didn't make sense with Mormonism. And I tell people that the best anti-Mormon literature you can read is the New Testament. So I kind of studied my way out of Mormonism, but I didn't know what to do. And so we had to move to from Milwaukee to Dubuque because of a thing. My wife needed to go to nursing school there. And what happened was there was this ad in the penny. We have these little penny advertisers that come out every week.
Let me try to skip
And
through.
that just threw me. So I went there and I was totally unprepared for what I found because this guy that was there, he was like an evangelist teaching stuff about the end times. And I kept challenging him with questions and he had answers. This is the first time I had ever, gotten into a dialogue with someone that really knew their Bible. It was a Christian. And finally, I said to him, this is
This is why we got to know that word. This is why we got to know that word.
the thing that Mormons always throw at people that they perceive to be Protestants. I said, well, where do you get the authority to baptize people so that they can be saved? Well, he said, where do you get the idea that it's like that? It says in Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved and thy house. And then, of course, later on they were baptized. So it's all about faith. And that just threw me for a loop. And I ended up, going home that night and I was trembling because I thought, could it really be just this simple? And I went home and I prayed and I fasted and prayed. And finally, I remembered that comic book, those two comics, and how in the back of it, they had this little thing, how to get born again. So I took off my magic Mormon underwear because I don't know if you know this, but Mormons wear magic underwear. And because I didn't want any, static on the line. And I prayed the prayers that were in the back of the comic, and I got gloriously born again. That was in 1984. And then a couple years later, I got called into the ministry. I went out to Salt Lake City. I was invited to go and speak at a big conference out,
Let me see if I can get to you.
melting car parts into big aluminum slash Masonic group. And you'd have intention, like if you were doing a Gnostic mass for someone to fall in love with you, or doing a Gnostic mass for someone to get a job, that kind of thing. Pretty bad stuff.
When it comes to Masonic rituals versus the earlier rituals, then was there overlap?
Oh yeah, that's the funny thing, because the guy that basically started the modern Wiccan revival was a British retired civil servant named Gerald Gardner, who lived in the New Forest region of England. And he claimed that he had come in contact with this traditional witch coven in the forest there, and they initiated him. And he was also a Freemason, like a lot of people in Britain that are either in the military or the civil service. They are also into Freemasonry because it helps them get along in their job, And he incorporated a lot of Masonic stuff into the rituals that are part of the Gardnerian and the Alexandrian branches of Wicca. So, for example, but here's the funny thing. If you were to go through the first degree of the Masonic order, you would find this long, involved, blood-curdling oath that you have to swear when you're kneeling on this altar with your hands on the Holy Bible. And the end of I'm not going to give you the whole thing because we'd be here for a half an hour, but the end of it is, you got your hands in the Bible, say, all this I most sincerely promise and swear, binding myself under no less a penalty than having my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots, and buried in the sands of the sea, where the tide ebbs and flows every 24 hours, should I knowingly violate this, my entered apprentice obligation, meaning an oath. So help me God and keep me steadfast in the due performance of the same. So that's That's the first degree oath, and they get worse and worse and worse. And things like having
And that's why it's so hard for them to renounce their affiliation. You know, that's why it's so hard. That's why we really have to have, you really have to have the Holy Spirit, and you really have to know the word, and, the truth, right? The truth, in order to minister to them, or to witness to them, to bring them over.
your bowels
Unless, God, has prepped them, basically, by putting them in situations that they can't get out of without God. That's my prayer all the time. That's why I be praying prayers like, God, put them in a trap that they can't get out of without you. And he will do that.
ripped open, things like having the top of your head smote off and your brain exposed to the burning sun. I mean, just wonderful stuff. And can you imagine if your pastor, because many pastors, both in America and in, I'm sure, the United Kingdom, are Freemasons, and your pastor going through this kind of mummery? I
Come
mean,
on.
aside from the fact that it's satanic,
Whew.
it's just frightening, you know? And here's the irony. This is what I was getting at. If you were to have a first degree witch ceremony, well, first of all, you'd be tied up similarly to the way the Mason is tied up, except you're naked. You're blindfolded. You're kneeling at an altar. You don't see what you're looking at. And you swear, I think I can do this from memory. You swear that all this I most solemnly and sincerely promise and swear, advocating myself under no less a penalty than having my weapons turn against me, meaning your witch weapons, should I ever break this my solemn oath. Now that's kind of benign compared to saying I want my throat to be cut and my tongue ripped out by the roots, don't you think? But there's so many commonalities between
Oh yeah, your weapons gonna be turned on you, boo. They gonna be turned on you. You get to messing around over and up in this camp. Okay, so you know what I mean? Just you see what I'm saying?
the witchcraft rituals, the Masonry rituals, and surprisingly, the Mormon temple rituals. They all have many commonalities because they are all streams from the same satanic river.
Which ties into this question from a viewer. Do you think that all Freemasonry is evil? And if so, why?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying Masons are evil, but the institution of Freemasonry, because I think most Masons are probably good men, but the institution of Masonry is rooted in Baal worship. And by that I mean, if you go back and you read the Bible, the Old Testament, you will see that all the religions around Israel were worshiping Baal or Moloch or something like that, some pagan god. And all of those different deities, they boil down to phallic worship. In other words, the worship of the male genitals.
Yes.
And that is the god of Masonry.
Yes. Come on. That's why they sexualize everything. Listen, we're going to be talking more about, we're going to keep that triple X series going. We've got I think we got 3 parts to it now. We're going to keep it going because God said, it, this needs to be exposed biblically, and we're going to keep pulling it out and keep exposing it, because I truly, truly believe that was the forbidden act, or the forbidden fruit that they were not supposed to partake of. We know it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and all of that, but I believe that is what Satan offered to Eve. And yeah, that's in other teachings here on my channel. But yeah, watch the triple X series. I have like 2 or 3 parts, and I dived into it a little bit more on the episode that I did about Diddy and the sex magic. I think it was sex magic or something like that. But that's why all their rituals have something to do with sex, right? It's always, you know what I'm saying, you have to rape this person, you have to abuse, you have to, you know what I'm saying, abuse a child, or so on and so forth. It's always because this is what they're doing. This is who they worship, what they worship.
Now, that is going to surprise most
Let me go
Freemasons.
back.
They boil down to phallic worship. In other words, the worship of the male genitals. And that is the God of Masonry. Now, that is going to surprise most Freemasons because they don't know that. But if you read the books, if you read like Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, if you read Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the trouble is most Masons don't read their own books. Just like, unfortunately, a lot of Christians don't read their own Bible.
Mm.
But you will find that it will talk about how the God of Masonry, you see the letter G. And I don't know how about it is over in England, but in America, you're told as a beginning Mason, that stands for either God or for geometry. But later on, you learn that it stands for genitals, you know, and that's why Masons wear an apron over their midriff, and that hangs down, and they're actually told this is like the veil in the temple, in Solomon's temple, that kept the Holy of Holies sacred. In the same way, when a Mason wears an apron, his Holy of Holies is his package.
My God.
And if you want any further proof of that, just look at any headstone of a wealthy Mason in a cemetery. It's always going to be an obelisk, which is, a phallic symbol. And you look at here in America, our first president, George Washington, was when he was in the British Army before the Revolution, he was a Freemason.
Yes, he was.
And so when they put up the Washington Monument, it's it's the world's largest phallic symbol. It's a giant obelisk. And, we did a whole teaching, Ed Decker and I, like 35, 40 years ago, about how the whole of Washington, D.C. is like this giant Masonic talisman. That's probably off topic, but that's the main problem, is that Masonry refuses to acknowledge Jesus Christ. Masonry says that all religions are equally good, that you can be a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew, and they're all wonderful. And that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father except through me. And here's the problem. If you were a Christian and you joined the lodge, you would not be allowed within the lodge to talk about Jesus, to witness Jesus. You couldn't glorify his name in any way, shape, or form. And there's one degree in York Rite Masonry, and I don't know if you have that in Britain or not. You'd think you would, because it's named after a city in England. But in one degree, called Knights Templar, they talk about Jesus. But otherwise, it's all this perennialism and all religions are one and blah blah blah, which is a total lie. And here's the problem: when you kneel at that altar and swear that oath, there's a rope around your neck, a blue velvet rope that's held by a lodge officer. And at the end of the oath, you kiss the Bible, they take off your blindfold, and the worshipful master, who's standing right there, tells the officer, the senior warden, okay, remove the cable tow from about our brother's neck, because he is now bound by a much stronger tie to our fraternity. Now, what that means is that there is a spiritual bond that was created with this person, who may or may not be a Christian, and this Baal worshiping satanic fraternity.
A soul tie. A soul tie. They're saying, we got your soul now, so we don't need the rope anymore. Get rid of the rope. That's what they're saying. Wow.
And people need to understand, usually the devil is not up front with what he does.
No.
He's subtle. He's sneaky.
Mm.
And like my friend and mentor Ed Deckard said, if the devil came to your door as a 10-foot frog breathing fire, you wouldn't let him in. But if he came to your door as two sweet looking young men as Mormon missionaries, you'd let them in. And that's the thing. Masonry looks good on the outside, but like Jesus warned, within it's full of rottenness and dead men's bones.
So this cult of
let
Baal.
me just say one thing. If people want to understand more about this, brief plug, I wrote a whole book on why Masonry is, this is the old edition, the new edition looks different, but anyway, we've sold 100,000 copies of this book, and it's helped thousands of men get out of the Masonic Lodge. So this gets into more depth. We also have several DVDs that teach on this in detail, but it's very anti-Christ, totally.
Absolutely.
And all of Bill's links are in the description box below this video for the books, a website, etc. So please support his important work. So Bill, this cult of Baal, it just keeps coming up. We've been doing a lot on the Epstein case recently, and we're told that these families are still worshiping this. I've just done a good 2+ hours with David Icke. We're releasing that podcast tomorrow, and he's talking about the cult of Baal also, and ancient cults, and how they exist to this day. So what are your thoughts on these cult worshipping people in the modern era, and does that tie into Freemasonry and what people refer to the Illuminati? Is this how we're going up the power pyramid of society?
Yeah, basically yes. And in the book I just showed you, I have a chart where you see, like on the back of our dollar bill, we have this pyramid where it's truncated off at the top, and then you have this all-seeing eye. That is a symbol of the Masonic/Satanic hierarchy. And there's a reason why the top is lopped off. It's because that makes it a trapezoid. And if you know your geometry, you understand that a trapezoid is a truncated pyramid, and the trapezoid is one of the ultimate sacred symbols of Satanism. The inner order of the Church of Satan is called the Order of the Trapezoid. And I did a whole teaching on that. I don't think we want to get into it right now, but so, there's 13 layers. Yeah, there you go. There's 13 layers of bricks, and those represent the 13 layers working up. At the very bottom, you've got the Blue Lodge, which is the basic foundation of Masonry. Then above that, you've got, the York Rite, the Scottish Rite, the Shrine. Then you've got, the higher level stuff, the Memphis Mitzrayim, the Palladium. Then you've got the Illuminati. And then at the very top 2 or 3, you've got the 9 unknown men. And above them, at the very top rank, you've got what is called the 7. And when I was in all of this, I was told that the 7 are 7 fallen archangels that sit at the throne of Lucifer. And then, of course, the top thing, the all-seeing eye, is the symbol of Lucifer. And, of course, the words there in Latin, Annuit Chaptus Novus Ordo Seclorum, means this year begins the new world order.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, if you read the Roman numerals, along the bottom, it says 1776, which was, of course, the year America rebelled from you guys, but it's also the year the Illuminati was formed on May 1st.
The same year that America, that they left, they rebelled against Europe. They rebelled against Europe. Let me see here. Yeah, and came to America and formed their own, their own government.
That's when the Illuminati was created, on a high witch holiday, Beltane, of 1776.
So you've got a question from Shane, and thank you, Shane, for setting this interview up. As a former high-ranking Freemason, is there truth to claims that Freemasonry has hidden ties to the Satanic Church, and are those beliefs hidden?
I would say very much so, yes. Because at the higher levels of Freemasonry, you have what has come to be called satanic ritual abuse going on. We, as our ministry, have prayed for literally hundreds of people who, when they were little children, were sexually molested in Masonic temples. Now, this is not obviously part of their public persona, but it is going on. And again, it's all part of the same thing, like you mentioned, the Epstein thing, and all of these people that are into underage sex, whether it's with just pubescent girls or pubescent boys or even little children, it's based on the same idea of hardcore Satanism and hardcore Freemasonry, that when you rape a little child, you vampirize that child's youth, and you can steal that and somehow live longer. It's like you're being a sexual vampire.
Mhm.
And if you do this enough, the belief, which of course is nonsense, but this is what they believe, you can live for centuries. And so it all kind of hangs together. At the time, the Masons and the Mormons and the Vatican, as you go up that pyramid,
Mm.
they all end up in the same satanic place, messing with little children, messing with deflowering virgin girls, murdering people, cannibalizing children. All of this stuff is going on within Freemasonry, within Mormonism, and
Jesus.
within the Vatican. And I know there are other people that have testified to this, from various different perspectives, but I believe it's true.
You're getting asked about modern celebrities.
Let's pause before he starts talking about the celebrities, guys. This video is getting long, but I think it's worth it. So if y'all want to hang out a little bit more, just let me know. Please make sure that you share this as well. And I want to welcome Laura. Thank you for finding me on TikTok, and thank you for following me over. You are welcome, sis. You are welcome. I wanted to talk a little bit about what he said, because it was making me think about the porn industry, and how they have the porn industry has morphed into so many different things. This is why we talk a lot about sex over here, and in a way that helps people to um, be able to control their libido. Come on, we have to be able to understand what this really is. We talk a lot about the roots, how that whole thing got started, the roots of sexual immorality and fornication and all of that. Because if you can't control your libido, if you cannot control your sex life, then you can't control your life. Amen. And that is the reason why, why so many people are bound in sexual sin, even, church leaders and so on, sexual sin and perversion and things like that. That's the number one thing that the devil is pushing. Okay. That is his drug of choice. That is what he's pushing. And that's what he started with in the Garden of Eden. I just truly, truly believe that. So now, when he said that, I thought about the porn industry, and then I also thought about Hugh Hefner. I thought about all the young girls that they have uh, taken advantage of, and so on, and then how the porn industry, it became popular to have sex with children, even in pornographic film, right? And also incest is another thing that became popular. Yes, I used to watch it before I got saved, and even my first years after being saved, I was still bound. Okay. So I know, how it transformed, over the years, into, people sleeping with their children, and so on and so forth. I won't even go down that path. But then also it made me think about um, the child stars. How the child stars that when they bring them in, like through Disney and all that, to make them stars in the entertainment industry, in the movie industry, and so on. And how none of those children, they start out as, as innocent children, they look innocent and so on, but then, none of them make it through without being addicted to drugs, just completely demonized, like completely demonized. It's like, those children have to fight for their lives in that industry. And it's so, so sad. And there was another thing that it made me think about, which was, that one slipped my mind. Let's just continue now and it might come back. Oh, Jesus.
And Disney, for example,
Let's go back a little.
Children, all of this stuff is going on within Freemasonry, within Mormonism, and within the Vatican. And I know there are other people that have.
That was it. The Vatican. That's what that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about, how, how many welcome Samuel. Oh. Oh, wow. Well, God bless you. I pray you learned something from this video. Just keep watching. So I was thinking about, the Vatican. I was thinking about how many Roman Catholic, priests and so on. And then they also have so many movies about this, right? Why is it? I'm gonna do a video on called Why Horror, because God's given me some revelation there about why horror movies, why horror film. We just talked about the pan god and all of that, right? But if you notice, in almost every horror film, there's always a Catholic priest or someone's Catholic. It's a Catholic family. It's never really, a born again Christian believer that gets possessed by these demons or attacked and so on, right? It's always they always kind of tie it. I'm talking the serious ones, not the goofy horror flicks, right? Because I used to really be into horror movies and all that. Of course, I had to stop watching that when I started, God called me into deliverance ministry, and I started realizing that those were open doors and so on and so forth. But they, the serious ones, like the real ones, even going back to like The Exorcist and all of that, there's always a Catholic involved. It's always something with the Catholic Church and the Catholics, and and they've even got horror movies about Catholic churches, Catholic priests, who are molesting children and all of that. And then, of course, why? Because it's happening in real life. It's happening in real time. And he was, a witness to these things. So, yeah, that was the other thing that it made me think about. Sorry.
Have testified to this, from various different perspectives, but I believe it's true.
You're getting asked about modern celebrities and Disney, for example, their role in propagating this and pushing the satanic symbolism.
Yeah, well, Disney has never been a friend of the family. I mean, even back when I was a little child, I'm old enough. I remember when they started up Disneyland, and even in those days, Walt Disney was being financed by the black nobility and by the Illuminati to start warping the minds of little children. Because originally, things like, Hans Christian Andersen, Grimm's fairy tales, the things that, the 19th century children were brought up on were rooted in Christianity. And when Uncle Walt started making movies out of these fairy tales, notably, Snow White, Pinocchio, all of these things, he subtly twisted them, pulled the Christian elements out of them, and especially the movie Pinocchio is like a total. It's like basically the Disney studios, and mind you, Pinocchio's like 70 years old. I mean, I think it came out in the early 50s. and it's like a hidden thing of what the dark people are doing, because it's about the corruption of this child, of this, he's a puppet, but he gets in with these bad kids, and they go to this island. They're taken to this island where everything is fun, and you get to eat ice cream and rides and all that, and you gradually get turned into a donkey. And of course, in the Bible, the donkey is a symbol of our sin nature. And it's very much like what actually happened at Disneyland, because we ministered to people, the parents whose little children were taken when they were at Disneyland, and this was in the 60s, and they were taken to Catalina Island, which is an island off the coast of California, and horrible things were done to them there. And they were basically turned into sexual zombies. And then they'd get the poor child back, and the child was like suffering from, today we'd call it PTSD, and all kinds of horrible things. So Disney, and of course, especially in the last 10, 15 years, Disney has been overtly anti-Bible in a more open way, pro, homosexual, pro, all of this different stuff that's totally anti-Christian. And from the very beginning, Disney and the studio have been promoting the occult. So I tell people, if you think Disney is a family-friendly brand, think again, because Disney was financed by some of the darkest, richest people in Europe to basically corrupt the foundation of Christian children in America.
Are there any modern celebrities that stand out that are propagating this symbolism? For example, Beyonce.
Pause right there. I just want to, want to validate that. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the same thing that the Lord showed me about Disney, and then I started seeing things about Disney that, and Walt Disney, when I learned that he was an actual Freemason, that he was part of the Illuminati. Like, he is part of the Illuminati. He is part of a bloodline Illuminati family. So that, what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, the more you know, right? The more you know. That's why God is saying, my people are being destroyed for lack of knowledge. We are consuming things, we are purchasing things, we are partaking of things, and we are watching things, and we are listening to things that have been sacrificed unto demons. Amen. That have been sacrificed unto demons. And God is saying, stop eating things that have been sacrificed unto demons. Amen. I have two more little things that I want to show you here. We'll listen to this bit because he's going to say something else interesting that's going to blow your mind. But I want to get to his encounters. We know that he used to be a vampire, right? We're going to talk about, we're going to listen to his story about his encounter with a werewolf, right? Because he had two options. He could have become a vampire or a werewolf. These are real things, and he chose to become a vampire. Now we're going to hear about his encounter with the werewolf, and then his closing message to the Christian church. So let's finish this bit first.
Say Katy Perry.
Oh yeah, in America.
Are there any modern celebrities that stand out that are propagating this symbolism? For example, Beyonce, Katy Perry.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's kind of to the point of being a cliche that, all these different, pop stars, rock stars, whatever, like Ozzy Osbourne, who just passed away last week. I mean, they all, one way or another, I mean, he was pretty overtly into like devil worship, but many of them have said, yeah, I sold my soul to the devil for fame and fortune. So,
fun fact there. Well, not a fun fact, but it is a fact. I don't know if we, I'm not trying to, be funny here or anything like that. But the night that Ozzy Osbourne died, that morning that he died. That was our first episode of the Witching Hour here on the channel, and we were praying 3 a.m. behind enemy lines against astral projecting witches, warlocks, sorcerers, and all that kind of thing. And I mean, we were going in, we were going in, and later that day, I learned that he died that morning. So I was like, God, did we have anything to do with that? You know, because we were praying in the spirit, some fire prayer. And one thing I remember is the same thing happened to Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey's daughter ended up being raised by a Christian family because you know, the pastor ended up taking her in the same night that her father died. Anton LaVey died in his, they say in his sleep, but he died during an astral can't even say it, astral projection trip. And the pastor prayed against him and cut the silver cord in the spirit realm like we did that night. And he was not able to enter back into his body, and he died. So that's how Anton LaVey died. Okay. So, you know, I'm thinking when we were cutting silver cords left and right up in this prayer that on this particular morning, and I just don't know. I just don't know, but it could have been. But that's the same time that the same morning that Ozzy Osbourne died.
I don't know. I mean, I would say that probably the vast majority of, you know, movie stars, and I mean, you know, people like you know, I don't know if you know Jay Dyer, but he's an author and researcher. He's a brilliant guy, and he wrote this book called, I think he's got 3 volumes, called Esoteric Hollywood, which goes into all of the stuff that was going on, really all the way back to the beginning of the days of Hollywood, with underage sex, with, you know, pedophilia, all kinds of things, even back in the days of, you know, Charlie Chaplin, who was running around with underage girls all the time.
Mention of Hollywood there. I want to show you something quickly that you know, I learned about Hollywood. I was trying to explain this in a previous episode about why it's called Hollywood, like where that name came from, excuse me. And here's a really good breakdown of that. It's on the Truth Is channel. And I'll play this clip for you here quickly. Let me see if I can find that part. Let me see. I think it's right here. Let me share this tab instead. I think it's right here.
But in that video, I showed them a Masonic play that was held in London back in 2017. The Masonic play was about how the Freemasons created America to operate under Masonic beliefs. In this Masonic play that was made only for Freemasons, they openly admitted they created the United States, and they put the all-seeing eye in the back of the dollar bill. The Masons are intertwined in the fabric of America. Their goal is to create a world that operates openly off Masonic ideologies. Now, if you were to ask a member about any of this, they won't tell you anything, as Freemasons are forced to take an oath of secrecy, punishable by death if broken. This is why we don't see that many Masons speak out about their affiliation. Thankfully, one brave former Mason who has denounced his Masonic ties and has decided to break his oath to speak out, Bill Schnoebelen, was when he said he was told when he was a witch that magic was just harnessing energy from the devil. This is truly important, and I believe many people need to hear this. So many people are under the assumption that there's two sides of magic. There is a good side of magic called white magic, and there is a dark.
Did y'all just see that? Um, I want to warn. I want to make a warning right here. Let me go back a little bit. Y'all see that? So it's a naked woman's body that they have an image of here in the midst of this little seance that they're doing. Um, I want to make another warning on this, okay? Because this is something that became popular and it started trending, where it was popular to use these um, for decor, naked bodies, body parts, and so on and so forth. The little white ceramic, naked images that people are putting in their homes, especially YouTubers and beauty YouTubers and so on. They always kind of have these little images in their background. It became popular. It was a trendy thing to do, and I even know some people who have it in their house. And this is this is not good. God said, get rid of those things. Get rid of those things. Those are demonic imagery, and it comes from this same satanic cult. Excuse me. As they said, this is what they worship. They worship the god of sex, genitals, right? And so this is exploitation of women, exploitation of body parts, and so on and so forth. It's not a beauty thing. It has nothing to do with beauty. It's completely demonic. Get rid of it. Get it out of your house. That's what I wanted to say. Let me go back.
That there's two sides of magic. There is a good side of magic called white magic, and there is a dark side of magic called black magic. This is nonsense though, and it's propaganda put out by occultists to confuse God-fearing people. Masonic companies like Disney have instilled this in the minds of so many people since they were children, telling people that there are two sides of magic, while the truth is, all of the magic is from the devil and none of it is good. God specifically speaks out against all forms of magic. Bill also explains how he was told that if he wanted to understand Luciferianism, he should become a Freemason. He spoke about a druid telling him this. For those who don't know, the druids are warlocks from pagan times that were known to utilize holly trees to make holly wands that allow them to cast spells. This is where the word Hollywood comes from. I recently spoke about this in my video exposing the Oscars in Hollywood. You should check it out after this one if you haven't seen it yet. In this part of the interview, he also spoke about selling his soul, which he explains exactly.
All right, so I wanted to that's the gist of it. I wanted you to hear the part about Hollywood. How, why they named it Hollywood.
The druids are warlocks from pagan times that were known to utilize holly trees to make holly wands that allow them to cast spells. This is where the word Hollywood comes from.
So yeah, that's where that comes from. So let's finish hearing what he's saying here.
Yeah, Jay Dyer has been a friend of the channel for 5 or 6 years now. He's a great researcher. All right, so your next question relates to this guy. Did you ever know Michael Aquino? They say he wasn't a Mason, but it's all the devil's work. So was his temple of Set completely separate?
Well, it's hard to say that. I did meet him once. We were in the audience at a local talk show, KOMO in Seattle, and he and his wife Lilith were guests, and I challenged him. I stood up and I said, you're saying that what you're doing, this Temple of Set thing, is all very benign. But and he got really up. I mean, I could just see the daggers coming out of his eyes at me. But I don't know if he was a Freemason or not. I don't think he probably was, because what he was doing was so far above Freemasonry. Like, if I've read a lot of his work over the years. I was never in the Temple of Set, but headquarters of the SS, and did this magical working called the Wewelsburg week. That's hard to say. The Wewelsburg working, where he claims that he was anointed by Set to be like the John the Baptist of the Setian revolution that was coming. And Set, if you don't know, is just kind of the Egyptian version of Satan. And he's like this dog-headed god. He's a jackal, and Crowley was really into Set, Aleister Crowley. So I don't think there was any formal connection between the Temple of Set.
Okay. Let's get ready to wrap up here. Play this part about the werewolf encounter, and then his final message.
Wanted to cover, after having been involved in all these cults, Freemasonry. Now, today we talked about even the deeper and darker things that you were involved with the Luciferian initiation, I think you called it. There was a lot of demons, a lot of fallen angels, if you want to call them that, and a lot of people that did not like that you became a Christian. And you said that you had a lot of attempts on your life. Some people in the comments of the last video were talking about how you had experiences with werewolf, and we talked about in the middle part of the interview or whatever that there's kind of a fork, right? You can either become a vampire or a werewolf. So this kind of ties with something that you talked about earlier. What happened after you became a Christian with the werewolf thing? Can you tell that story?
Well, the personal thing that happened to me, okay. Years ago, there's this one ritual. It's called the Feast of the Beast. It only takes place every 28 years. It's a very high-level satanic thing. We were warning people about it, pray, because this is a very big night when they're trying to bring in the kingdom of darkness. And there's a lot of sacrifices being done all over the world. Well, anyway, so I was sitting in our prayer room, praying up a storm, interceding for all of the people that may or may not have been captured, young people, children, whatever, for this terrible ritual. And very early on, when we started doing deliverance, we always had the practice of laying open a Bible, King James Bible, in whatever room we were using to do the prayers. So it happened that in this room, there was this little table, because you're on the ground floor. And this little table, we had an open, just, Thompson Chain Reference Bible, actually. And all of a sudden, the window exploded. And this werewolf literally comes in the window. Let me tell you, a real werewolf, and I mean, now I know they do all this stuff with CGI and all, but they're huge. I mean, they're like 6 or 7, well, they're like 7 or 8 feet tall. And this thing came through the window. I mean, paws that were bigger than my hands, and its paws landed on the Bible to get purchased to push itself into the room. And as soon as it hit the Bible, it let out this howl like I've never heard anything like it before or since, but it was just like the thing was in agony, and it literally burst into flames and landed on the carpet and left this big scorch mark on our nice carpet, which I had to explain to the landlord why we had a busted window and why we had this, scorch mark on our beige carpeting. So that was the only time I had an encounter. But my wife, when we were out in Seattle, I was at a conference in Salt Lake. And this is out in the country. And we were living in a parsonage by the Saints Alive compound, which was the Ed Decker's ministry, Saints Alive in Jesus, still is. And anyway, so my wife and her sister were there. And all of a sudden, they heard this thump, thump, thump outside the house. It was dark, you know, and they were on the second floor, like a split level. And it sounded like a giant walking around. And they opened the blind,
Jesus.
and there were these red eyes staring at them from the second story. And she went, because it was trying to open the door. And she went, you know, the old thing, you put a chair under the door, but it was when they were praying. And it paced around the house. It howled, because then we were right in the middle of what is called the Issaquah Alps. We lived in Issaquah, Washington. And there were wolves, coyotes mostly. But this thing was howling like crazy, and it was easily 8 feet tall because it was looking in the second story of the living room window. And finally it went away. And the next morning, I was still in Salt Lake, but they called and told me what had happened. They went out and looked, and there were footprints on the ground that they were like this long, over like probably close to 18, 19 inches long, with 3 like pads and then a big pad with a heel. So it's like a giant elongated half wolf, half human footprint that was that big. So that was very real. And we actually took a picture of it and showed that to a local veterinarian who happened to be a Christian. And he said, I've never seen anything like that in my life. You know, it's not a bear, it's not a wolf, it's something totally, you know, other. And this was not personal to me, but because of my background in the occult, I was called in a lot by the police, the Seattle police. And I, in fact, gave training.
Now just hold on to your edges. Just hold on to your oxygen mask, please, because this is about to blow y'all's mind. What he's about to say. Like, this is about to blow y'all's mind. Yes, I believe him too. Like this, it is wild. It sounds like something out of a horror film. And, you know, that just lets us know that, you know, listen, all that stuff is real, and it came from somewhere. It came from somewhere. It started somewhere. I believe him too. I honestly believe him too. But this right here is about to blow your mind. Just seatbelts, please.
To the police force on occult.
Let's go back.
But because of my background in the occult, I was called in a lot by the police, the Seattle police. And I, in fact, gave training to the police force on occult crime. This is way.
Pause right quick. I just wanted to say something because he said that, you know, he lived in Seattle, right? As we know, the movie Twilight, the movie series Twilight trilogy, rather, is it a trilogy? It's probably more than that now. Was filmed in Seattle, Washington. As the story goes, because I told y'all earlier, I used to love that movie. I had it here at my house, all the DVDs and everything. I did a little digging to see, you know what I'm saying, you know, if that was really true happening in Seattle, because there were stories coming out around that time saying that werewolves were often seen in Seattle. Vampires were often seen in Seattle too. So, you know, I think he's telling the truth here.
Back in around 1990, force on occult crime. I, in fact, gave training.
Okay, let me go back.
My background in the occult, I was called in a lot by the police, the Seattle police. And I, in fact, gave training to the police force on occult crime. This is way back in around 1990, I would say. And anyway, they called me in because this incident happened. As far as they know, it was a homicide. And what was the case is these 2 kids, boys, around on their bicycles, and they were riding around, dumb kids, after dark in a landfill. We called it Mount Trashmore because it was really creepy. And a lot of these landfills, they have fires going, burning off the methane from the decaying trash. And yeah, these kids were riding around on their bikes in this godforsaken place, and they come around this big pile of trash, and illuminated by these fires was this circle of people in black robes. And they lifted up what these kids said looked like the naked body of a young girl and plunged a knife into her. And she screamed, and one of them, the kids, freaked out and screamed. And everybody looked their way, these people in the robes, and all of a sudden, there was this giant wolf-like thing that started coming after these two boys. It was like a watchman. And so the kids were, they took off on their bikes like crazy, pedaling for their lives, literally. And the one kid got ahead of the other kid, and they could hear this thing, flump, 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 like Bigfoot or something, these big, heavy footprints, kind of like what my wife and sister-in-law heard way in the other incident. He said it was chasing them. And all of a sudden, the kid that was ahead of him heard his friend scream, and that was the end of him. And then the thing started chasing the first kid that was ahead, and he was just pedaling for all of his life. And he said this giant claw came around. It was probably twice the size of my hand, and grabbed him by the chest. And he cried out, "Oh, Jesus," at the top of his lungs. And the thing let go like it was scalded. And it left this claw marks on his chest right through his t-shirt. And the kid pedaled home as fast as he could. Of course, his parents, called the police. They never found the first child. And everything was cleaned up. The ritual site was totally sanitized, which is what they do. But they had me go up there and look around, and they also had me look at the child, because he needed like 20 or 30 stitches. And there's these 4 or 5 gash marks on his torso. And I said, it sounds, I hate to say it, but it sounds like there was a lycanthrope, a werewolf that was guarding this particular, site against this very kind of thing happening. And what I was told when I was in Satanism is that basically that's what the function of lycanthropes is to either be assassins or to be guardians of ritual sites.
Wow.
Because if they want to kill somebody, they'll just send the werewolf after them, and people, the police, gee, it was a wild animal attack.
Mm.
And nobody's the wiser. So I have not had any, fortunately, that thing with the Bible setting the werewolf on fire, that must have happened at least 15 years ago. And I haven't had thankfully, any encounters since then. I think they're rather rare, the lycanthropes. But I shouldn't probably go into that.
We got to wrap it up because you got to go. But your testimony is, I think it'd be fair to say that it's one of the most unbelievable ones, in both sense of the word.
Indeed it is, but I truly believe him. Whew, this is crazy.
And a lot, if not most, or every person that's going to watch this is going to struggle with parts of it, if not your entire story, doubting that you made it up or that you imagined all of this or whatever. It is very hard to believe. The first time that I came across it kind of shook me too. what would you say to the skeptics about all these experiences that you just mentioned? Vampires, werewolves. These are things that most people don't think are real at all, and it will be hard for them to believe your story, to take you seriously. So what would you say to these people?
Well, number one, I would say that, in the book of Revelations, we're told that liars end up in the lake of fire. And I have no desire to go there. I mean, if I were to have left out a lot of this stuff from my testimony and just talked about being a witch and even being a Satanist and getting born again and the Masons and the Mormons and all of that, that would still be very glorifying to the name of Christ. And it wouldn't have, why would I do this? Why would I make all this stuff up? You could say, well, it sells books. Maybe not. But I talked it over with Ed Decker, who was kind of my spiritual mentor, and also with Jack Chick, who at that time was my publisher. He's since gone home to heaven. And he says, Bill, I think you need to tell the whole thing, because most Christians do not understand the depths of the demonic power that rages beneath the surface of society.
Yes.
Most Christians think we live in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood.
Ooh.
I mean, that's kind of a dated reference, but I think everything is nice and all that. And there's a dark, evil force that is simmering, and it's coming out now. It's showing itself. I think partly it's because the level of Christian power in this nation has waned. I think many Christian churches have lost the fire. They have compromised, and it's not the fault of the people. It's the fault of the preachers, because there's an old saying, the pew cannot rise higher than the pulpit.
He said a mouthful, because I have been saying that same thing. I'm like, this, it's not the people's fault. It's not the church members' fault that we don't know certain things, or that the average church member doesn't even know spiritual warfare, or how to cast out demons, or anything about deliverance or demons. It's not their fault, honestly. It's the fault of the leaders who are not teaching these things in our churches. And then whenever they get exposed for not teaching the truth, or the members come with this knowledge about it, like, hey, do you know anything about this, or why can you talk about this, etc. The reason why excuse me, the reason why they don't know, then the leaders start beating, the shepherds start beating the sheep, like, you should know this and you should know that, right? Or when they hear other churches teaching about it, and then they come and they, what I'm saying, now you want to try to whoop your kids or, beat the sheep about not knowing such things. Well, you should know, the spiritual warfare, and you should know, this and that. And like, no, you did not teach us. You did not teach us. And the church, as a result of that, has become so lukewarm. And that's why God is saying, wake them up, blow the trumpet in Zion, wake them up, right? Because we're supposed to be on fire, and not just on fire because of the basic, foundational principles, of the doctrine of Christ. Let's go on. As Apostle Paul said, let's go on. The Lord has allowed us to go on, and to move on from the basic elementary rubric of Christianity into deeper things, right? On into deeper things, because we have to learn this stuff. We can't, what I'm saying, we can't occupy. Jesus said, occupy until I come. We cannot occupy if we are mediocre, lukewarm, baby milk Christians that can't eat meat, can't digest meat, think that, people who are people like us, are too deep. I've had pastors tell me, well, you're just too deep. And then I just came out with a t-shirt that said off the deep end, cause you know what I'm saying? Cause yes, I'm going very, very deep. And in fact, I'm going off the deep end. I want to jump into the deep end of the pool. I want to learn about, the devices of my adversary so that I'm not overtaken by them. So these are the kind of things, like he said, uh yeah, the fire has waned over the last, I would say, um especially this generation. I would say over the last 2 decades of Christianity, at least, the fire has waned. It has definitely waned. I got saved in 1997. I was 24 years old. So that tells you. And before then, that we had books uh God's Generals and so on and so forth that talked about, uh demonstrated people in the faith that will really, really walk carrying the fire of God, and that were doing performing miracles and casting out devils and all of that. But we got away from that. We got away from that stuff, right? When I got born again, I ran smack dab into deliverance. I mean, my case was so bad, the church was tore up by the time they finished with me. The chairs were everywhere, and I was all the way at the back of the church, and there was 2 men were having to hold me down, So I mean, like, this is necessary for the church to learn these things and to wake up from this, Cheerio Christianity, this gimme gospel. All they want is what they can, all they come to God for is what he can give you. You know what I'm saying? No, it's about becoming like Christ. It's about being transformed into the image and likeness of God and becoming the actual sons of God and walking in dominion over this kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? Because when a devil like this roll up on you, you know what I'm saying? He them demons should be like, I've never seen nothing like you before. I'm sorry, wrong house. Let us just backtrack. You know what I'm saying? Because they know, like, it ain't going down. It ain't. You got the right one for sure. Let's wrap this up.
So because of this, and I'm not saying all churches, there's thousands of wonderful churches, but
Right.
They have turned into pop psychology.
Mhm.
They don't want to deal with the spiritual realm. And I want people to understand that this darkness is real, but that no matter how deep into the darkness you can get, and I was about as deep as you can get, Christ can pull you out. He can redeem you from the very depths of hell. He can redeem you. And that's where I was going. And, people can believe me or not, but I have dedicated my life to proclaiming the gospel and to, speak the truth in love. And as it says in Ephesians 5:11, to expose the unfruitful works of darkness that I myself escaped from. And I know my story is unbelievable, but I've been at this. I started the ministry with Dicker in 1986. So it's going on 40 years that I've been doing this. And, it says, by their fruit shall you know them. And we have led thousands of people to Christ. And sometimes, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And my shadow is pretty dark, but the light of Christ shines through, I hope. And I hope people can tell I'm sincere.
Amen. All right. So that's it, guys. We're gonna go ahead and shut down for the night. Like, that was a doozy, right? That was a doozy. I know this was extra long. I'm probably gonna try to cut this into 2 parts. Or people are just gonna have to try to, watch it when they can. But it's a lot of information, a lot to learn. But listen, there are things in the dark. Okay, there are things in the dark that some people just don't want to don't want to talk about, and I understand, because it's not pretty, you know what I'm saying? But for those of us that God had to pull out of the depths of darkness, then we know that you know, these stories need to be heard, because there are more people out there. Like I said, you know, when God had me praying for Marilyn Manson and all that, you know, and then God had him in the trap, just like we prayed for, you know. So but you know, he chose to go back into the darkness. You know, what can you do? You know, what can you do but continue to pray?